Imagine this situation. You wake up in the middle of the night. You cannot move. You cannot scream. You feel the presence of someone in the room. Sometimes you see a figure standing beside your bed. You feel pressure on your chest. It sounds like a scene from a horror movie. And yet this experience is real for millions of people around the world. Today we will attempt to answer the question: is sleep paralysis purely a physiological phenomenon, or could it be something more? Something paranormal. Sleep paralysis. A sleep disorder or an experience at the edge of reality. Sleep paralysis is one of those phenomena that lies on the boundary between two worlds: science and mystery. On one hand, medicine describes it as a well-documented sleep disorder classified as a parasomnia. It occurs during the transition between sleep and wakefulness. On the other hand, the accounts of those who have experienced it are so intense and unsettling that it is difficult to reduce them solely to a biological mechanism. This raises an important question. Is sleep paralysis merely a physiological anomaly in brain function, or could it be a state of consciousness in which a person touches something that escapes classical explanations? Imagine the situation. We wake up in the middle of the night. The room looks normal. We recognize the furniture, the door, the light coming through the window. We know we are not dreaming. We try to move, to lift a hand, turn our head, sit up. And suddenly we realize we cannot. The body does not respond. An attempt to scream ends in silence. The heart begins to race. Breathing becomes shallow. In the corner of the room, a shadow appears. We feel that we are not alone. For many people, this is one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives. The physiological mechanism. What does science say? To understand sleep paralysis from a medical perspective, we must look at the architecture of sleep. Sleep consists of NREM and REM phases. The REM phase, rapid eye movement, is the stage in which the brain shows very high activity. Comparable to wakefulness. It is during this stage that we experience the most vivid and realistic dreams. At the same time, the body enters a state of muscle atonia, an almost complete paralysis of skeletal muscles. This mechanism is controlled by structures in the brainstem. Neurotransmitters such as glycine and GABA inhibit motor neurons in the spinal cord, preventing physical movement. It is a protective mechanism. It prevents us from acting out our dreams in reality. In sleep paralysis, there is a kind of desynchronization. Consciousness returns, the cerebral cortex becomes active, but muscle atonia persists for a short time. A person is therefore conscious, yet physically paralyzed. This state can last from a few seconds to several minutes. However, the motor paralysis is only part of the experience. The key elements are hallucinations and intense fear. During sleep paralysis, the amygdala, the structure responsible for fear responses, remains active. The body interprets the inability to move as a life-threatening situation. The brain, trying to make sense of this state, generates images and narratives. Researchers distinguish three main types of experiences. First, the sense of an intruder. The feeling that someone is standing in the room. Second, pressure on the chest. Difficulty breathing, as if something is sitting on the body. Third, dissociative experiences. The sensation of floating above the body or leaving it. From a neurobiological perspective, these phenomena result from the partial activation of REM-related systems while consciousness has already returned. The brain is still dreaming, but the eyes are open. Statistics indicate that between 8 and even 30% of the population experience at least one episode in their lifetime. It occurs more frequently during stress, irregular sleep patterns, sleep deprivation, shift work, or anxiety disorders. It is also characteristic of narcolepsy. From a medical standpoint, the mechanism appears relatively clear. And yet, there is something more. Long before the development of neurology, people tried to explain this phenomenon in different ways. In Europe, it was called the nightmare. In Anglo-Saxon culture, the term old hag referred to an old witch sitting on the chest of the sleeper. In Japan, the experience is known as kanashibari and is interpreted as the action of a spirit. In the Middle Ages, It was explained as an attack by incubi and succubi, demons that visited people at night. Descriptions from that period are strikingly similar to modern accounts. Paralysis, pressure, the presence of a being, the inability to scream. One of the most suggestive artistic representations of this experience is the painting The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli. It depicts a woman lying helplessly with a demon sitting on her chest. It is almost a visual documentation of sleep paralysis. This raises a question. Why are accounts from different eras and cultures so similar, even though their interpretations differ? In the 20th century, with the rise of UFO culture, a new narrative emerged. More and more people began interpreting nocturnal episodes as abductions by extraterrestrial beings. The pattern is nearly identical. Awakening at night, inability to move, the presence of several figures by the bed, the sensation of floating, missing time. Descriptions of the so-called gray beings, short figures with large heads and black eyes, became a cultural archetype. Previously, demons fulfilled the same role. The civilizational context changed, but the core experience remained similar. Psychology explains this through the mechanism of attributing intention to unknown stimuli. In a state of fear, the brain assigns agency to what is unclear. However, people who experience these episodes often claim that it was conscious, that it observed them, that it reacted to their emotions. There are reports of telepathic communication or the sensation of an intelligent presence. Particularly intriguing are cases in which sleep paralysis is accompanied by the sensation of leaving the body. A person claims to have floated near the ceiling and seen their body from above. Neurobiology points to disturbances in sensory integration in the temporoparietal junction. For the experiencer, however, it is a boundary experience, often interpreted as evidence of the soul's existence. Some individuals learn to control sleep paralysis, transforming it into lucid dreaming. They claim that when they stop being afraid, the presence disappears or changes its nature. Does this mean the experience is entirely a product of the mind? Or perhaps fear itself is the key that opens a particular state of perception? Science can describe the physiological mechanism. It can identify brain structures, neurotransmitters, and risk factors. However, it cannot fully capture the quality of the subjective experience. It cannot measure the feeling that something foreign is present in the room. It cannot reduce existential shock to an EEG graph. Perhaps sleep paralysis is an example of how the brain creates experiences with a mystical character. Or perhaps it is a transitional state in which consciousness functions differently than in ordinary wakefulness. At present, there is no scientific evidence confirming the existence of demons or interference by extraterrestrial beings. Yet it is equally true that human knowledge about the nature of consciousness remains incomplete. The history of science shows that many phenomena once considered supernatural were eventually explained. This does not necessarily mean that every experience can be fully reduced to biological processes without losing its meaning. Sleep paralysis can be described as a sleep disorder resulting from the desynchronization of REM sleep in awakening. This explanation is logical, coherent, and supported by research. At the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that for thousands of years this experience has been interpreted as contact with something supernatural. A demon, a spirit, an extraterrestrial being. Perhaps the answer does not lie in choosing one perspective over the other, but in acknowledging that the mechanism may be biological, while the experience itself is profoundly existential. Sleep paralysis then becomes a phenomenon at the boundary between sleep and wakefulness, between body and consciousness, between science and mystery. And it is precisely this liminality that continues to fascinate and leaves the question open.